her graduation from college, Liz Allen decided she wanted to return to Washington, D.C., and undertake more work at the State Department, where she had interned during her senior year. It was work for which she felt well suited, and also which kept her comfortably situated on the non-political side of Washington's professional world. Then, in 2008, a young senator from Illinois decided to vie for the Democratic candidacy for the office of President of the United States. His name? Barrack Obama. And his ideals and his candidacy changed Liz Allen's life.
I did my internship in D.C. at the State Department during my senior year. The SUNY system had a program called the SUNY Washington internship semester or something like that. You came down with the SUNY program, but then you were in charge of finding your own internship. So I applied to the State Department and was first rejected and then accepted, some sort of paperwork issue, but it worked.
Why the State Department?
You know, I think after semester at sea, after seeing the world, as they say, my interest in international affairs was certainly piqued. And I've always sort of believed in the good the government can do, and so I wanted to try to experience that internationally. And interestingly, sort of ended up spending most of my interview working on issues related to Afghan women, which at the time was a priority of First Lady Laura Bush and Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. So it was a pretty unbelievable internship to walk into an office and work on an initiative that was supported by some of our sort of high-level people. And at the time, obviously, with the war going on in Afghanistan, there was a lot of parallel track work being done on the humanitarian and human rights side. And so to jump into that, and you know, we had women visiting from Afghanistan. We did meetings that the First Lady and the Secretary were involved in. It was an unbelievably eye-opening experience to be a 20-year-old and watch this happen.
Did it encourage you to want to become a candidate or someone who would be a representative of the people as opposed to someone doing the interior work?
No.
You've never had that desire?
I have personally not had that desire. I greatly admire the people that are willing to do it. I think my strengths and my comfort zone are both sort of behind the scenes.
I can't believe you even used the term comfort zone, because you have described about 5 different things that are so far out of most anybody, including even yours. You said comfort zone, and yet you would hesitate at running for office?
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting question, and certainly one that my peers and I contemplate more now than when we were younger, because, you know, sort of you look to the next generation of who our leaders may be.
Right.
And I think one of the challenges is that I just personally don't know that I would want to give up the privacy that would be necessary to give up. So I value...
All those Facebook posts will come back to haunt you.
All the Facebook posts are coming back to haunt you, I know. Every photo ever taken of you gets resurrected. Everything about your family gets, you know, potentially misinterpreted. And I think that's a really unfortunate side effect of the nature of our elections, the nature of the news media, the nature of social media. And it worries me, frankly. Me and my peers, it worries us just that, you know, quality candidates may get weeded out just because the process is what it is.
Well, that and money. You can't fund it.
Yeah.
You finish that internship and you go home and graduate.
I went back to school for a semester. Mm-hmm. Yep, and then graduated in 2006.
And so now you're all ready to do what?
Well, and then I did the best job I've ever had, which was being a waitress at Outback Steakhouse.
Come on!
I did.
And I bet you made a bundle in tips.
I loved it. I worked at Outback for 3 out of my 4 years in college, on my summers and my holidays, and so I did that right after I graduated. I tried not to put too much pressure on myself to have the perfect job the day after graduation, but I certainly started in earnest a job search, and then it took me about 3 months to find something in DC.
When you start looking, do you start to approach political connections? Do you start to see who knows what senator or, you know, your hometown politicians in any way?
You know, at that point, I was actually sort of divorced in the politics side of it and wanted to stay on the policy side of it.
So you wanted to stay State Department or?
Yes. So I was looking at agency jobs. I was looking at jobs that were mostly nonpartisan. I had had a very positive experience at the State Department for my internship. And so, you know, I was looking a lot at State Department jobs, which is ultimately where I landed.
So what was the first job title?
It was, I think, administrative assistant and then management analyst. But the first job out of college I did at the State Department, I was working within a sort of task force office that was working on human trafficking and human smuggling, which was both very purposeful feeling and also really interesting because we were working sort of with the 360 universe of people that deal with those issues, to include not just policies and programs, but intelligence and law enforcement and the legal side of things. So it was actually an incredibly valuable experience coming right out of college.
Lots of contacts.
Lots of contacts, and frankly, a really good understanding to be dropped into an office where you were working with people from the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department, the intelligence community, the law enforcement community, the Department of Justice, to understand those agencies and the cultures of those agencies and the missions of those agencies, and to understand how they all work together. I mean, because one thing about DC is, there's every acronym organization under the book, there's tons of government agencies, there's a lot of sort of behind the scenes work being done, and so to try to understand that was really valuable. I stayed in that job about a year and a half.
What happened
in that office? Barrack Obama ran for president. I had been following Senator Obama since he was a young senator. As a political observer, he stuck out to me when he made his 2004 convention speech in Boston.
You're inspired by him, clearly.
Yes.
And as he picks up steam and it becomes more and more apparent that he's going to be the endorsed candidate, are you wanting to do something, or are you just observing?
It very quickly translated from observation into wanting to be a part of it. And that was a combination of both feeling like I was hitting a little bit of a ceiling in my State Department job, which was just a natural, occurrence in the sort of job cycle, and also feeling really pulled to be a part of the movement, or the I say movement at the time. It felt like a movement, let's put it that way.
But now you're crossing a line that you didn't think you were going to cross.
Yeah.
You're going into the political realm,
Yes.
which up until now you haven't wanted to be in.
Exactly. Yep. It was a very conscious decision.
Did you have doubts because it was politics?
I didn't have doubts because it was him. I didn't have a doubt about him.
How old were you?
23, probably. Having lived in DC for almost 2 years at that point, just, sort of networked and asked around and figured out sort of how to get your resume around to different people, and ended up getting a job in Denver on the Democratic Convention. And I lived in Denver for 9 months in 2008.
And what did you do?
I was in the security department. So
credentials and things like that?
Yeah,
security?
and working with the local police and the Secret Service on sort of an access control plan and the perimeter plan. And it was a really good learning experience because you sort of got to see a bird's eye view of the whole convention and sort of how everything worked together.
And when the convention's over, you're done.
I was done.
So then what? You've got to feel like adrift.
A little bit adrift, but it's kind of a natural part of the cycle that people keep being reassigned to different jobs in an election year. So after the convention, most of my convention colleagues and I went on to do work for or with the campaign. So a lot of my colleagues went to go do trips and advance work for any of the Obamas or the Bidens. I went to Pennsylvania for the last 8 weeks and worked on their Get Out the Vote operation. My job was to work with a team that was making sure that every office was getting everything they needed in order to execute their Get Out the Vote plan to get people to the polls.
So you finish, he wins.
He won. Didn't sleep that night.
I can imagine the party.
Yeah, we didn't sleep the night before either. I think it was. I remember trying not to fall asleep at the table, as the election results were coming in, just from sheer exhaustion.
Where does it go from there?
Didn't know what my future held. Didn't know if I would get a job in the incoming administration, but I knew that if I was going to, it would take some time. So I knew that I had to sort of have a backup plan. So I went back home to Buffalo for the fall and the holidays, and not only worked at Outback, but also substitute taught a few times for some of the districts for which you didn't need a teaching certification. So you can imagine that 2 weeks after you are part of electing the next president, you are teaching home ec to 6th graders, and got a call to go work on the inaugural committee. So I left and came down just for the last 3 weeks to work on the inauguration right before January 20th in 2009. And then it was back to Buffalo after the inauguration. I appreciated that my room had not been turned into an office because I came back and kept the bed warm for a few months in between.
So you go home and you wait, and how long does it take?